now that you kind of understand the underpinning of what functional medicine is, I want to go back to tonight's topic, which is, it's all in your head. I said earlier that depression, or emotional grief, if you will, comes after long years of being sick and being told that it's in your head. It creates a spiritual emotional imbalance. It's not that the spiritual emotional imbalance in many cases of chronic illness actually was causing or contributing, because a lot of times when people get sick, they're spiritually and emotionally sound for the most part, and it's not this that creates the disease. Now, that's not to say that it can't create the disease, because I've seen cases where this did. But when you've been told by your doctor that it's your age, your stress, your depression, your genes, that's a very depressing scenario, right? So we get that depression scenario. Well, now this depression is influencing the behavior of your genes. And when you're psychologically depressed all the time and your genes are being activated in a manner that's going to drive you in this direction, what this represents, if we really want to just put a word to it, it represents hopelessness. Because what you're being told is that there's nothing you can do. There's nothing that can empower you to make adequate change. And when you're hopeless, you're definitely depressed. And you don't have an answer, you don't have a solution, and you don't have any steps of action that you feel confident that if you take will lead to a resolution. This can create a major, major cycle. Now that depression is feeding into your genetics and driving you in this direction, and it keeps you in that direction. So again, even though this came after the illness, right? The accusations and the doctor misinformation came after it. It created a state of hopelessness. Or it created a state of dependency. Because maybe your doctor said, maybe he said, there is hope. There's this drug that we can give, right? And this drug, it's a great new revolutionary drug that's going to change your life or whatever, but even though that drug doesn't lead to any kind of real resolution, it basically gives you a false sense of security under the guise of compassion. In my opinion, that's what these do. Now, there are times where, I'm saying this in broad spectrum, because if you've got a major infection in 104-degree temperature and it's a bacterial infection, you take an antibiotic, that drug is a cure. But aside from the antibiotic, there are very few examples of medications that actually provide a cure for disease. Most of them are designed to treat the symptoms of disease, but not to actually treat the underlying cause of the disease. And for example, if you look in the field of rheumatology, most of the drugs are designed to suppress the immune system or block inflammation. But none of the drugs ask the question where the immune system has gone wrong or why the inflammation exists. And if we really want to know the underlying reason, we can't just develop drug dependencies, because these give us false sense of security, because they can help your symptoms, but they're not going to get you here. No drug will ever get you here. Drugs do not create wellness. Physical, chemical, spiritual, emotional equality and balance are what bring you wellness. So, what are some examples here under this physical category? For moving into that physical category, one of the best examples I can give you is obesity. Obesity is an inflammatory condition. I don't care what you see on the media. Sometimes media actually tries. I see shows where they're trying to glorify big and beautiful, when in fact what they're glorifying is inflammatory obesity. Obesity is a state of inflammation. We know that. It's been very, very well studied. It's a physical condition as well, because the bigger you are, the more that you weigh above what your frame is designed to carry, the more stress and pressure you put on your vascular system, on your heart, the more stress and pressure you put on your physical system. So, you ever try carrying 10 pounds around all day, and how much more tired you feel when you're able, or how much easier it is to move when you take that 10 pounds off? Like that, imagine somebody being 20 or 30 or 40 pounds overweight and carrying that much around. It's that much more pressure on their shoulders, on their knees, on their ankles, on their back, on their spine. And it will wear away and wear away at you. So obesity is a perfect example of a physical aberration. Another one is scoliosis. Somebody with a severe bend in their spine and they have to walk crooked. We might have people with chronic muscle aches and pains where they develop limps, or they develop what are called antalgic gaits, where they change the way they move and walk in order to try to avoid the pain. So these are all kind of examples of physical aberration. Now, you don't even have to be overweight. You could be not obese, but under-muscled. That's another type of physical problem. So being under-muscled, remember what physical is. There's an old saying, an old adage, square tires don't roll. Structure dictates function. So if you don't have adequate muscle, that's structure, that's structural. If you have too much fat tissue, that's structure. If you have an abnormal curve, that's structure. If you have a sprained ankle, that's structure, right? So structural issues here. If you have a lack of physical movement, a lack of physical activity, a sedentary lifestyle, those are all choices that we get to make every day. You may not choose to have scoliosis, but if you choose to sit at a desk and you never exercise and you never stretch and you never do the nourishing component to your physical body after putting it through a potentially abuseful sedentary situation, then you're asking for trouble in this physical category. Then we have the chemistry. And the chemistry, predominantly what is chemistry? Chemistry is food. It's what's in the food. So, it could be food flavoring, it could be food additives, it could be dyes, it could be chemical preservatives. So we'll just use the connotation chemicals. And that chemicals in the food, but food plus the chemicals in the food. But it could also be chemicals in the air, chemicals in the water. Many people are exposed, for example, to heavy lead. If you remember Flint, Michigan a few years ago, where the lead contamination played a major role in making a lot of people sick. So food and chemicals. We also have microbiome issues, so like bacteria, yeast, viruses, parasitic microorganisms. So these are all chemistry. These are things you can't see with the eye. These are things you can see with the eye. These are things you can't necessarily see with the eye, but you can measure with the microscope or with technology. So the chemistry, if you're eating the wrong food, if you're being exposed to lots of chemicals, if you're malnourished, if you don't have adequate quantities of vitamins and minerals, if you have bacterial overgrowth or infection or other kinds of problems, these are examples of chemical reasons that we can develop or create a chemical imbalance. And again, this is not all-inclusive of everything, but it's just, I want you to understand the concept. And then we have the spiritual and emotional. And if this is your background, coming from that, seeing 7 or 8 or 9 doctors and being told that it's in your head, that it's your age, that it's stress, depression, or that it's your genes, and you're in a state of depression, then you've got either drug dependency or hopelessness or a combination of the two, and that's feeding into this as well. But understand, you could also have, as an example down here, you could be in a job you hate. You could have, I'll call it a soul-sucking profession, right? You could just literally hate going to work every day. So that could be, for many people, you could have relationship issues. You might find yourself in an abusive relationship. And abusive doesn't mean somebody's beating on you. It could be an emotionally abusive relationship. It could just be a relationship that's not the right one, that makes you very, very unhappy and creates the spiritual emotional imbalance, right? So again, these are all just examples, but I want you to understand is that each wall of this triangle influences the behavior of your genetic light switches, but each wall of this triangle also influences the behavior of the other wall. So not only that, we have interaction toward the DNA, but we also have interaction toward each other. This is holism, and this is why you can't, in traditional medicine, in allopathic medicine, what happens is, if you go see an orthopedist, for example, and this is not me saying orthopedists are bad people, but what do? They look at you physically. Right? They'll look at you physically, and generally they'll offer up physical manipulation. What is physical manipulation? Like a surgical procedure, right? And maybe they'll send you to physical therapy. But again, even if it's physical therapy, they're addressing the physical without looking at chemical or spiritual emotional. You can't just address one side of this triangle and expect that the other two sides are going to fall right in place if you've got problems in all 3 areas. For example, most people with chronic illness don't just have a physical obesity. They generally tend to have something like a physical obesity. They're eating foods that they shouldn't eat. They're being exposed to chemicals they shouldn't be exposed to. Their foods have created a yeast overgrowth. They've got emotional problems because they hate their job, right? And so it's this combination of different things that I really want you to understand. And if nobody's taking the time to ask these questions in these different areas and really analyze it and really look at it under a microscope, and then offer up guidance based on this information, then you stay here. You stay stuck in this area of hopelessness, in this area where you're using medications to mask or to suppress your symptoms. And this is a horrible place to be, right? And that's why, understand, this right here requires a ton of work. This right here requires a ton of action taking and it requires a ton of courage. And not everybody has the courage to walk away from this and say, look, I'm going to look at myself in the mirror and I'm going to get with a doctor who understands this type of concept, and I'm going to do the work that it takes. Because no matter what doctor that you have, if you've got problems in these 3 areas that you're not willing to address, you'll never get better, no matter how much you understand this, if you're not willing to take the action. Because nobody's going to give you a pill or a passive therapy that's going to correct these problems for you. There's no weight loss pill that's going to correct obesity. How many times have we seen that happen in marketing, where a new company came out with a new pill, another company comes out with another pill, another company comes out with another pill? What's always the outcome when people rely on pills to fix their problems? The outcome is their problems don't go anywhere, or their problems morph. So this requires work, right? And so it requires the right headspace, right, to overcome this, to get here, then to be able to do the work and to move forward. So I wanted to have that conversation with you tonight, because if you're struggling with a chronic illness and nobody's ever broken it down to you this way, nobody's ever explained it to you in this way, I want you to understand this, because now if you move forward with this in your head, then your headspace changes and hopelessness goes away and hope comes back, and now you are empowered to take the action. Hey, and if you missed the earlier part of this series, click right here so you can go back and get caught up. The information there might be critical to helping you on your path to better health. And as always, thanks for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe for updates below. Have a great day.